Want to expand the reach of your content? Start a podcast. Feature industry experts on your show and leverage the influence and reach of your guests to grow your brand. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Sara Varni. She is the CMO over at Twilio. Sara, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for joining us. You just got back from some international travel at the time of this recording, so I appreciate you making some time to join us. And we're going to be talking about something that is fresh on my mind. We just got done with a small event ourselves at Sweetfish, putting together a customer mastermind group around podcasting. And today we're going to be talking about some things that you can do to reverse engineer the perfect event in B2B, how you want it to feel and how you can extend that community after the fact. But before we get into that, Sara, I would love for you to share with listeners a little bit about yourself and what you and the team at Twilio are up to these days.
Absolutely. Yeah. As Logan mentioned, I'm Sara Varni. I'm the CMO here at Twilio. I've spent the past 12 plus years focused on customer engagement. I was previously at Salesforce.com working on Sales Cloud, which is their flagship product. Now I'm at Twilio. Twilio is the leading cloud communications platform. We provide a series of communications APIs and solutions to help you connect to your customers via any channel that they want to connect to you on, if that's SMS or voice or video, even fax, any way they want to communicate. We empower developers to build those connections.
Yeah. Sara, you and I hadn't even talked about this, but I love that you mentioned fax there. You're talking to a recovering copier salesman. So I've seen some industries where fax is still alive and well and being improved in certain ways, which is probably, pretty surprising for most of our listeners. But I love that. And the underlying theme that you mentioned is meeting customers where they are and how they want to communicate with us. I think that's so important no matter, what phase of growth you're in or what industry you're serving, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a massive gap between customer expectations and what businesses deliver in reality today. Customers have super high expectations with the explosion of apps and devices and channels in terms of, receiving the exact right message at the right time in the application where, they want to communicate. And Twilio helps brands today bridge that gap.
So that actually, dovetails nicely. Maybe I'm stretching a little bit, but we're going to be talking about, building meaningful relationships through events. And as you're talking about building connections with your customers. So there were three specific things I know you wanted to touch on in talking about how you think about building your event and develop, communication with guests after the fact. And the first thing is you and I were talking offline, Sara, you mentioned thinking critically about the goal of the event and reverse engineering how you format it, how you bring it together based on that. Tell us a little bit about your experiences there.
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, you have to think about who's the audience that you're trying to target and if doing face-to-face programming makes the most sense. I think the place where you often see events really taking shape and driving pipeline is toward the larger company size end of the market, if that's enterprise customers. I think that they find the most value in connecting with peers in similar roles, in sharing best practices across their companies. And, for me, thinking about a market holistically, if I need to drive enterprise pipeline, that's where I'm going to focus a good amount of energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we talked a little bit on thinking about making your event or the theme, or at least the way you think about it. Do you want it to really be new prospect focus or problem focus? Tell us a little bit about this mental exercise you've gone through as you've planned and executed a lot of events in your career.
I think it's just got to be a give get relationship. And this speaks for all of marketing. I don't think that my strategy when it comes to events is all that different in how I think about content marketing, for
Mhm.
example. If you've got to earn the right to talk to these prospects. And I think that means you can't lead too heavily with your product right out of the gates and really be solving a higher order problem for that prospect. If it's driving more conversion, if it's helping improve CSAT and focusing on that higher level problem as opposed to being like, hey, buy this product tomorrow and your world's going to be saved.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to the next one that I know you wanted to touch on, Sarah, and that is how you think about your speaker lineup. What are some of the things people should be thinking about here? Because no matter the type of event, there's usually some, speaking component, either, the bringing it home with the keynote or breakout sessions. Tell us a little bit about how you think about speakers as you plan and craft events.
I think that you've got to craft a speaker lineup that is going to sound obvious, but that brings something to the table that people haven't heard before. Because if you think about the executives you're trying to target, they have busy lives, they have families, they have work obligations, and the speakers you bring to the table need to be compelling enough for them to take a night off from their family or to take a half day off of work and have to catch up at some other point. And often the people that are going to be the biggest draw are not necessarily the people at your company, unless you're, working for the Warriors. So I think you got to think about, who's going to be a draw if that's a third party thought leader, or if it's a customer of yours that is doing something extraordinary. I know at Twilio, people always want to hear about how Uber built their application, what their approach is to messaging, how Airbnb thinks about communicating with their customers using a variety of new channels. And so giving people access to those people who have really been disruptors in the space can be a big draw.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's probably some added benefit there as well because you're propping up your existing customers and giving them the stage and highlighting an opportunity for them to share their expertise. So that's even more of that get give with your customer that you're lining up as the speaker as well, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think some marketers hesitate to bring customers and prospects together because they think it'll turn into a venting session. But in my experience, 9 times out of 10, your customers are going to do the selling for you. And if they're engaged enough to attend one of your events, they're normally on the positive side of the spectrum and going to be huge evangelists for you.
Yeah, I love that. I think getting over that fear or that concern there can be a lot of benefits on the other side and can be more effective than you doing your selling as you were pointing to there as well, Sarah. So let's talk about connecting clients together or connecting customers and prospects. You and I were talking about an event that you attended recently that really was crafted well in a lot of different ways to create some strategic connections for the people that were attending. Tell us a little bit about some of the things. You don't have to necessarily name names, but I know there were a lot of great lessons from that experience that you and I talked about last time that I think would be great for marketers in thinking about their own events.
Yeah, I fall into that category as many of you who are listening do of the person who doesn't have enough time for everything that they're asked to do and has a family at home and all those things. But I had a former colleague reach out and said, hey, we're having this dinner with a set of select CMOs to talk about best practices and to just share lessons learned. And they really created that FOMO. I was like, oh, this is something I don't want to miss. I want to, this is going to be a rare opportunity for me to commiserate with other CMOs about, the challenges in B2B and, thinking full well the whole time, even, as a marketer, I should see through some of this, but thinking the whole time, this is just more of kind of a community group as opposed to being backed by a vendor. And I get to the event. It was a really nice dinner at a nice location and all those things that were also a draw, which is definitely, don't underestimate the importance of that.
Mhm.
And, the conversation was very open-ended. It was basically everyone went around the room and said, talked about a time where they had failed, but it was genius. In the backdrop there, this had been planned by a vendor. The vendor worked really closely with their VC firm, and the VC firm happened to be connected to all these people. And that was, my colleague was at the VC firm who had reached out. And then it all kind of started to click together. But even though we ended up hearing a product pitch at some point, I got huge value out of that dinner. They had recruited a great set of people. I learned a lot about, some of the other challenges my peers were facing. And so I didn't feel like it was a night where I'd been like bamboozled into figuring this product pitch. I had actually got something out of it. So, they had really nailed that give-get
Mhm.
relationship. And,
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot to be learned from that.
Yeah. So it wasn't the timeshare presentation after the free lunch where they keep you locked up for 2 hours or anything like that.
Yeah, they did a great job of recruitable people. And I think we all left getting something out of it.
I love it. So you talked about recruiting the right people. So people that would actually be able to have a valuable conversation with their peers. So think about that. Not only, the people you're trying to reach, but who would they gain value from talking with? And then setting up the conversation. So don't just think about getting the people in the right room. Think about how can you kick off the conversation that's going to deliver value. And in this case, they opened it up to talk about some failures and challenges, right?
Yeah, it just it made the audience all feel a little bit more open to just discussing problems, and I think it just kind of broke down any kind of awkwardness or nervousness in the room because everyone realized they were on the same playing field, which I thought was really smart.
Mhm.
Uh, and when I've hosted similar dinners, I try to ask as open-ended of a question as possible. If I'm hosting a dinner around, let's say, customer service, I might ask, what does your customer service experience look like in the next 5 years, your ideal state? And it's just interesting to hear the different answers you might get based on the types of customers you have in the room, if they're in different industries, if they are looking at it from different angles. And I think that's the way to foster a conversation that doesn't feel forced and that people eventually, learn from each other as well.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to that piece here that you're delivering value by helping craft those meaningful conversations. Now, beyond the event, we've talked a little bit about, you can continue to deliver value to people who attend your event by helping people stay connected. So don't just leave it at crafting that meaningful conversation, but include some sort of way, some avenue or method for those people who attended the event, got value from those connections to then extend those connections. Because if you are the one who is continuing to facilitate that, then it rolls back to you, right? You're getting the value from those folks are seeing the perceived value that you're delivering because you're helping them continue those relationships that they began at the event, right?
Absolutely. I think it's a way to just build your brand beyond the event. Of course, all
Mhm.
these people can, get business cards or collect with people on LinkedIn after the
Right,
event.
right.
But if you're the hub of that connection, you will just always be top of mind when that person engages with that other executive again.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about this even recently at the event I just mentioned, in the way that podcast hosts can set up a Slack channel community for guests of their podcast to be able to connect together. Now, the challenge there is if you're going to be the hub, you have to think about how am I going to curate that community? How am I going to facilitate engagement, those sorts of things. But I think there are some practical ways that you can do that. Any other thoughts there on helping your guests of your small events to stay connected to each other before we let you go, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to be respectful of the channel. You don't want to be spamming them with every ebook you have. But if you do have something relevant based on the conversation that was had at that event, I
Mhm.
think that's completely fair game. And it's also a way it also creates a new channel that people might be more receptive to than in traditional means if they're, sending all of their typical solicitation emails to spam or filing those away. That can be a way to follow up on things like your annual user conference and see if you can get that group together again at another one of your events so that they can continue to build the relationships with each other.
Yeah, that's a great example there. You've got another event on the calendar that makes sense for that small group to get together, making sure that you reconnect them, because that first shared experience is only going to deepen in that second interaction. I think that's a great little nugget for people to think about, not just getting, these large groups of people and the same people over and over to your events, but within that, where are the little microcosms, the little small groups that you can connect together and really deliver value by helping them facilitate relationships with the folks in their space. I love that point that you're advocating there for as well, Sarah. Well, Sara, if anybody listening to this would like to stay connected with you, learn more about what Twilio's up to, anything along those lines, what's the best way for them to reach out or to find you?
Anyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I meet plenty of people through the network, and I'm always happy to help people either navigate Twilio or also just answer general career questions about being a B2B marketer. And we are hiring at Twilio. So if you are on the market or looking for your next opportunity, please reach out. I'm always looking to bring rock stars onto the team and would love to chat more.
Awesome. I love that, Sarah. We've got a lot of smart marketers that listen to the show and have been guests on the show. So hopefully that message reaches someone where the timing might be right. You guys are doing great things on your team, and we'll make sure we link to your LinkedIn profile right in the show notes. So if anybody's looking for that connection, go ahead and reach out to Sarah. Definitely. Well, Sarah, this has been fantastic to talk with you again. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.